The wind howled across the valley like a living beast, clawing at every hollow and ridge, carrying with it snow so sharp it stung bare skin like teeth. The prairie lay drowned in white, a vast and merciless sea of ice where nothing stirred except the storm itself. And in that storm, half buried in the drift at the edge of a frozen creek, lay a woman with torn garments and a back lacerated raw from lashes. Her breaths came shallow, ragged, each one a battle she seemed destined to lose. Around her clung 2 children, small bodies pressed into her sides, their faces streaked with tears that froze to their cheeks before they could fall. The girl, no more than 7, tried to cover her mother with her threadbare shawl, but the wind snatched it from her shoulders, tossing it into darkness. The boy, slightly older, held tight to his mother's wrist, whispering words that only a child's desperation could summon. "Wake up, Ma. Please wake up. Don't leave us here." His voice cracked, carried away in the storm, unheard by anyone but the girl who clung to his arm and sobbed. Their tormentors had ridden off not long before, their hoofbeats swallowed by snow, their laughter still echoing in memory. They had whipped her until she fell silent, then tossed her down like garbage, warning her never to rise again. They said she defied them, that she thought herself stronger than men who owned the valley. For that sin they had left her bleeding in the snow, certain the storm would finish what they started. The children had begged for mercy until their throats were raw, but mercy was a thing unknown to those men. All they had now was each other, and the mother's faint, slipping pulse. The boy looked into the swirling dark, his eyes red with cold and fear. He thought he saw shapes moving between trees. Wolves, maybe, or men. He pressed closer to his mother's side, shielding her body with his small frame. The girl whimpered, "What will we do?" He had no answer. He could not fight the storm, nor the hunger gnawing his belly, nor the truth that their mother was dying, and they were too small to carry her anywhere. But then came the sound, heavy, deliberate, cutting through the gale like drum beats. Footsteps, not hooves, but boots sinking into snow. A figure emerged from the white, vast and terrible in shape, wrapped in furs that looked like the hides of beasts long since slain. His shoulders were broad enough to dwarf the children, his beard and hair thick with frost. At first, the children froze in terror, thinking the storm had conjured some phantom to collect them. But when the figure came near, they saw his eyes dark, steady, unyielding as a mountain stone, yet not cruel. He paused only a heartbeat, taking the sight before him. The broken woman, the children clinging to her, the blood-staining snow beneath her back. Without a word, he knelt. Snow cracked under his weight. He pulled the heavy fur from his shoulders and laid it over the woman, tucking it tight around her shivering body. The children shrank back at first, but when they saw how gently his massive hands lifted her, they did not resist. He hoisted her into his arms with ease, as though she weighed nothing, and motioned for children to follow. They stumbled after him, clutching each other, as he turned and strode into the storm. The journey through the blizzard seemed endless. The man walked with slow, steady steps, snow clinging to his boots, breath rising in great plumes. The children trailed close, their small legs struggling to keep pace, but fear of losing him kept them near. The woman stirred faintly, a moan escaping cracked lips, and the man glanced down at her, eyes tightening, as though recalling ghosts of his own. He carried her higher, up through a stand of pines that creaked and bent under the weight of snow. At last a dim glow of firelight flickered ahead. A cabin stood against the slope, rough-hewn logs stacked solid, smoke curling from its chimney into the storm. Inside, the warmth was immediate, thick with the scent of burning pine and dried hides. Shadows leapt across the walls where antlers and tools hung. The man laid the woman on a bed of wool and skins near the stove, then poured whiskey into a tin cup. He tore strips from a clean cloth, soaking them before pressing them to her wounds. The sting roused her, a weak cry breaking from her throat. She tried to push him away, fear flashing even in her broken state. But he caught her wrists, firm yet not cruel, and met her eyes with a look that silenced resistance. Then he released her, continuing his work with quiet patience. The children huddled by the stove, shivering less as the heat seeped into their bones. The man glanced at them only once, then ladled broth from a pot into 2 wooden bowls, setting them beside the fire. The smell, rich with venison and herbs, made their stomachs ache with hunger. They looked to their mother, then back to him. When he gave a small nod, they took the bowls, sipping greedily until warmth spread through them. The boy whispered thanks, though the man gave no reply. Hours passed. The storm outside raged on, but inside, a different silence held sway. The silence of labor and watchfulness. The man cleaned and bound each lash on the woman's back, his hand steady, his jaw set in grim line. He had scars of his own, puckered flesh visible when his sleeves shifted, silent testimony that he knew both pain and survival. When he finished, he covered her with furs, then set another log on the fire. The children had curled together, asleep at last, faces softened by warmth. He studied them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The woman stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she did not remember where she was, and terror gripped her. Then she felt the softness beneath her, the warmth of furs, the faint scent of smoke and pine. She turned her head and saw him seated nearby, sharpening a knife by firelight. The steel flashed with each stroke of the whetstone. She whispered, her voice hoarse, Why did you take us?" His eyes lifted to hers, but he gave no answer. Only the steady rasp of stone on steel filled the air. She closed her eyes again, too weak to ask more. Morning came pale and brittle. Light spilled through cracks in the shutters, illuminating dust motes that drifted in air. The woman woke to the sound of splitting wood outside, each strike echoing like a drum. She tried to rise, but pain lanced across her back, forcing her down with a groan. The children stirred at her side, clambering up to press against her. She kissed their foreheads, whispering gratitude that they yet lived. Her eyes wandered to the door, where cold air seeped in. She wondered what price this man might demand for his help. No man gave without wanting something. And yet, when he returned, hauling logs to the stove, he said nothing at all. He only stacked them, fed the fire, then set bread and dried meat before the children. By afternoon, her strength faltered again, and she drifted in and out of sleep. In dreams she saw the faces of the men who had whipped her, their laughter as they cast her down. Shame burned hotter than the fever in her blood. She remembered how they had called her defiant, how they sneered that she thought herself better than those who ruled the land. She remembered the jeers, the blows, the way her children cried as she fell. She had thought death would claim her then, and perhaps she had welcomed it. But now she lay in a stranger's cabin, alive, with her children still breathing beside her. Perhaps fate had not abandoned her entirely. The children explored the cabin in hushed awe, running fingers over carved wood, over the thick pelts that lined the walls. They discovered a wooden horse on a shelf, worn smooth from years of handling. The boy held it carefully, sensing it belonged to another child once, long gone. When he glanced at the man, he saw his eyes fixed on the toy, his face shadowed with something like grief. The boy returned it quietly to its place, saying nothing. He understood loss, and did not wish to stir it in another. That night, as the storm began to ease, a sound carried through the woods, a long, low howl that made the children clutch each other. Wolves, hungry, circling. The man rose, pulling on his coat, and took a torch from the wall. He stepped outside into the night, rifle in hand. From the window, the children watched him stand tall against the dark, the fire in his grasp casting a circle of light as eyes glimmered beyond the tree line. The wolves prowled but did not dare draw near. With a voice like thunder, he shouted into the night, and the beast slunk back into shadow. The girl whispered. He scared them away. The boy said nothing, but in his chest he felt the first stirrings of something fierce and new. Safety. When the man returned, snow clinging to his beard, he found the woman awake, watching him. For the first time, her eyes did not hold fear, but something quieter, harder to name. Gratitude, perhaps, or the fragile beginning of trust. He placed the torch back, leaned his rifle by the door, and sat once more by the fire. She whispered, voice rough, "I thought we were finished." He looked at her, and though he still did not speak, there was answer enough in his gaze. The storm might rage again, men might come with whips or guns, wolves might circle, but so long as he stood, they would not be alone. Outside, the wind quieted, the valley buried under white silence. Inside, the fire glowed warm, shadows dancing across the faces of three souls who had known only suffering, now gathered under one roof. The woman closed her eyes, her children pressed close, the ache in her body fierce, but softened by the strange certainty that, for the night at least, they were safe. Yet even in that fragile peace, a thought lingered at the edge of her mind. The men who had left her in the snow would not rest. Their cruelty was not finished. Somewhere beyond the ridge, they would be plotting, and she wondered, as she drifted into uneasy sleep, if the silent giant who had carried her from the storm would truly stand against them when they came again. The days that followed bled together in a rhythm both fragile and tense. Snow melted slowly off the roof of the cabin, dripping in steady beats like a clock, counting down to something inevitable. The woman healed in small increments, her strength crawling back into her limbs with each bowl of broth, each careful dressing of her wounds. The children regained color in their cheeks, laughter trembling to life like young shoots breaking through frost. Yet the shadow of fear never strayed far. Each knockwood against the chopping block outside made her heart jolt, as if it were the pounding of hooves returning to claim her. The mountain man spoke little, but his silence was not cruel. It was a silence filled with purpose. He moved with steady certainty, tending fire, gathering game, mending tools. The children began to orbit him without realizing it. The boy watched the way he set snares and copied the knots with clumsy hands. The girl followed him to the woodpile, her small arms carrying sticks he could have lifted without thought. But he let her help all the same. The woman observed it all, her heart aching with a strange blend of gratitude and fear. She had sworn long ago not to depend on anyone, not to trust promises of protection. Yet every gesture of his, the ladle of stew, the quiet nod of approval to her son, the gentle way he placed a blanket over her when she shivered, drew her closer to believing that maybe she had found shelter not just in a storm, but in life. One morning, when the snow lightened enough to see across the valley, smoke rose black against the pale horizon. She froze when she saw it, her breath catching. That was no homesteader's fire. It was a signal, a gathering. Her hands trembled as she gripped the window frame. The children followed her gaze, fear rippling through them as if instinct had told them already what it meant. The man came behind her, silent as always, and studied the smoke. His jaw tightened, and for the first time he spoke more than a few words. "They're hunting." His voice was gravel, deep and sure, but it sent a shiver through her. She turned toward him, her face pale. "They'll come here. They'll come for me." His eyes met hers, steady, unblinking. Let them. That night the cabin felt smaller, as if the walls themselves braced against what was coming. The man laid out weapons, a rifle, 2 revolvers, a long knife. He checked each with methodical care, setting them within reach. The woman sat by the fire, her children pressed close, staring at the glint of steel. She remembered the last time she had seen guns drawn. The laughter meant as whips cracked across her back. She shook, unable to mask it, and the man noticed. Without a word, he placed the long knife in her hand. Her fingers curled around it awkwardly and used to its weight. She looked at him in alarm. "I can't." He did not take it back. "You can," he said simply. And then, softer for them, he tipped his head toward her children. Something broke loose in her chest then, not fear, but something hotter. A will she thought had died. The following day the boy begged to go with the man into the forest to check traps. She resisted at first, but the man only said he should learn. Reluctantly, she let the boy go, her heart pounding until they returned hours later, the child grinning proudly with a rabbit in his hands. The girl stayed at her side, asking questions she could not always answer. Will they find his mama? Will he keep us safe? She kissed the girl's hair, whispering, he already has. But in her heart, she wondered how long safety could last in a land ruled by cruelty. The storm that had covered their arrival gave way to clear, biting nights. The woman often woke to find the man still awake, sitting near the fire with his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on a window. He seemed carved of stone, yet when her fever returned one evening and she collapsed to the floor, he caught her before she hit the ground. He laid her gently back on the bed, wiping sweat from her brow with a damp cloth. His touch was careful, almost reverent, and when her eyes fluttered open she saw in his face not just watchfulness but grief, as if her suffering dragged him into memories of his own. She wanted to ask what ghost haunted him, but the words died on her lips. Some silences felt sacred. It was the children who broke it. The boy, emboldened by his time in the woods, asked one night as they ate by fire, "Did you have a family?" The man froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. The girl looked stricken, ready to scold her brother, but the man only set the spoon down slowly. His eyes moved to the carved wooden horse on the shelf. He did not speak, but the children understood. The woman's gaze softened, realization dawning that his solitude was not by choice, but by loss. In that moment, her trust in him deepened, bound not by words but by shared sorrow. Days later, the threat materialized. She was gathering water from the creek near the cabin, her children splashing at her side, when the sound of hose cracked the stillness. She froze, water sloshing from the bucket. Figures appeared on the ridge, riders in dark coats, their horses pawing snow. Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed her children's hands and ran for the cabin. Shots rang out, bullets sparking against stone. The man emerged from the doorway with his rifle raised, firing once, twice, sending the riders scattering back behind trees. He barked a single word, "Inside," and they obeyed. The children scrambled into the cellar as he barred the door. The night that followed was a siege. Shadows circled the cabin, voices taunting from the dark. The woman clutched the knife he had given her, trembling but ready. The man stood at the window, rifle steady, eyes scanning. They struck once at the door, splintering wood, but his bullet drove them back. They tried fire, tossing torches onto the roof, but snow smothered the flames. Hours dragged like days, the air thick with smoke and gunpowder. The children whimpered from below, their cries muffled but piercing. At dawn the attack came full force. Shots shattered glass. The door buckled. The man roared, a sound more beast than human, and met them head-on. The woman saw him fight like a storm-given flesh, his rifle empty, his knife flashing, his fists breaking men down. She could not stand aside. When one intruder crashed through the window, she drove the blade into his side, the shock of it rattling her bones, but igniting a fire she had not known she carried. She fought not as a victim, but as a mother whose children's lives hung in the balance. The battle raged until the snow was trampled red. At last the leader remained, a sneer cutting across his scarred face as he raised his gun at her. For a heartbeat she froze, seeing again the lash, the laughter, the night they left her die. But before the shot could fire, the mountain man slammed into him, the two grappling in the snow. They rolled, fists and knives flashing, until the man's strength overpowered the villain. With a final brutal strike, he drove him down into silence. The valley rang with the echo, then stilled. Breathless, bloodied, the man staggered to his feet. The woman stared at him, her chest heaving, knife still in her hand. Slowly, she lowered it, tears blurring her sight. He looked at her, his face carved with exhaustion, and in his eyes she saw not triumph but something softer. Relief that she and the children still stood. She crossed the bloody ground to him, her legs trembling, and pressed her forehead against his chest. He let out a shuddering breath, his arms encircling her and the children, who clung to them both moments later. The days that followed were quieter. The dead were buried in the snow, the ground frozen but yielding under relentless work. The cabin bore scars of battle, but the fire burned warmer than before. The woman healed not just in body but in spirit, her back still marked but her eyes no longer filled with fear. She worked beside him now, mending, cooking, gathering wood. The children laughed more easily, chasing each other through drifts. At night they sat together, a family forged not by blood but by survival. One evening, as the sun sank red over the mountains, she stood with him outside the cabin. The sky blazed like fire against snow, and the air smelled of pine and smoke. She turned to him, her voice low. "I thought I'd lost everything, but you gave it back." He shook his head. "You kept them alive. I only gave you shelter." She reached for his hand, scarred and rough, and held it. "No, you gave us more than shelter. You gave us home." He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, a faint smile touched his lips. Inside, the children's laughter spilled from the firelit cabin. She leaned against him, the cold air biting but no longer cruel. Together they watched the mountains, their silence no longer empty but full. The valley that had once tried to bury them now bore witness to their survival. And though the world beyond might bring storms again, she knew this truth. They would face them together, a family reborn from snow and blood. And so, under the endless sky of the frontier, a woman who had once lain dying in the snow found not only life but love, not only shelter but strength. The mountain man who had carried her from death carried her still, not in arms but in the bond they now shared. The story did not end with scars or sorrow. It ended with firelight, with laughter, with the promise that even in a land as harsh as the Wild West, redemption could be found in the most unlikely of places.